After he called me a useless teacher 3 times, I taught him a lesson he'll never forget. You won't believe how this ends. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Marla Henderson stood in front of her 3rd grade classroom as the morning light filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across worn desks. Her cardigan, faded from countless washes, hung loosely on her shoulders, while chalk dust painted her fingertips white. The classroom walls were covered with colorful posters she'd purchased, with her own money, each one carefully laminated and hung with hope. 23 pairs of eyes stared back at her, some bright with curiosity, others dulled by circumstances beyond their control. She recognized the signs: the boy in the back, whose clothes hadn't been washed in days, the girl by the window who flinched when voices raised the child who ate his free lunch as if it might be his last meal. These weren't just students to Marla. They were her children, her purpose, her entire world compressed into 4 walls, and a dream that education could change everything. The dismissal bell rang like a death knell, signaling the end of another exhausting day. Marla's feet ached from standing for 8 hours straight, her voice hoarse from projecting enthusiasm over the chaos of childhood. She gathered the stack of papers that would consume her evening. 23 math worksheets, 23 reading comprehension exercises, 23 glimpses into young minds struggling to make sense of numbers and letters. The janitor's cart squeaked past her door as she finally locked her classroom, the sound echoing through empty hallways that just hours before had buzzed with laughter and learning. Her small Toyota Corolla, now 12 years old with a rattling engine, carried her through Chicago's congested streets toward a house that felt more like a battlefield than a home. The front door opened before she could find her keys, revealing Robert's stern face, twisted with familiar irritation. His tie hung loose around his neck, expensive suit wrinkled from another day, climbing corporate ladders that seemed to lead nowhere but frustration. Late again, he muttered, not bothering with a greeting. Must be nice having a job where you can just leave whenever you want. Marla set down her heavy bag filled with tomorrow's lessons, her shoulders sagging under more than just physical weight. The kitchen table bore evidence of his solitary dinner: a single plate, a half-empty beer bottle, the newspaper folded to the financial section, where red numbers told stories of losses and missed opportunities. She moved quietly through the motions of heating leftover soup, her hunger secondary to the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Teaching. Robert spat, his voice cutting through the kitchen silence like a blade. That's barely a real job. 10 months of work and 2 months off. I wish I had it that easy. The words hit Marla like physical blows, each syllable designed to diminish the passion that had driven her for 15 years. She stirred her soup mechanically, watching the steam rise and dissipate, much like her dreams seemed to do lately. Glorified babysitting, he continued, warming to his theme. You make peanuts while I carry this household. You think stickers and songs are changing the world. You're just a useless teacher. The spoon clattered against the bowl as her hands began to shake. She'd heard variations of this speech before, but tonight the words seemed to echo in her chest, creating a hollow space where her confidence used to live. But what would you know about changing the world? She thought, watching him scroll through his phone, more interested in social media than the woman sitting across from him. The parent-teacher conferences stretched late into the evening, each conversation a delicate dance between honesty and hope. Marla sat across from parents whose faces reflected her own exhaustion, single mothers working 2 jobs, fathers who spoke little English but understood everything about sacrifice, grandparents raising children they never expected to see again. She spoke of reading levels and social skills, of small victories and areas for growth, each word carefully chosen to build rather than tear down. Mrs. Patterson wept when Marla described how her son had finally read his first complete book, while Mr. Chen nodded solemnly as she explained his daughter's remarkable progress in mathematics. These moments, these connections, these tiny triumphs, this was why she became a teacher. The school parking lot was nearly empty when she finally locked her classroom, the security guard's flashlight cutting through darkness as she walked to her car. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Robert, each message more irritated than the last. "You're always tired," Robert said without looking up from his laptop when she walked through the door at nearly 10 o'clock. The living room felt cold despite the furnace humming their wedding photos on the mantel, like artifacts from a happier archaeological dig. For what nothing? You're a useless teacher. That job is draining you for no reason. Marla stood in the thai, doorway still wearing her coat, her purse hanging from her shoulder like dead weight. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's tears about the boy who had struggled with reading all year, until something finally clicked about the daughter who would never know her father's pride in her mathematical mind. These weren't nothing. They were everything. But explaining this to Robert felt like trying to teach calculus to a stone wall. She walked past him toward the bedroom, his words following her like accusatory ghosts. Have you ever experienced or known someone who has experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The transformation began quietly, like dawn breaking over a sleeping city. Marla started documenting her days, not for sympathy or attention, but because the world seemed to have forgotten what teachers actually did. She wrote about Tommy the boy with autism, who had spoken his first full sentence after months of patient encouragement. She shared the story of Maria, whose family had fled violence in their home country, and how education became her bridge to a new life. Her posts began as simple observations, honest glimpses into a classroom where miracles happened daily in the form of breakthrough moments and small victories. Parents started sharing her stories, former students reached out with gratitude, and slowly the internet began to take notice. A local journalist discovered her blog and wrote a feature article titled "The Teacher Who Cares Too Much," which caught the attention of people far beyond Chicago's borders. The offers arrived like autumn leaves, abundant and unexpected. Publishing house wanted her to write a book about classroom experiences and life lessons learned from children. A major education nonprofit invited her to lead teacher training seminars across the country. Television producers called about documentary projects and motivational speaking bureaus extended lucrative contracts. Each opportunity paid more than her monthly teaching salary, some more than she made in an entire year. But instead of leaving the classroom, Marla made a different choice. She used the money to transform her school. New books for the library, fresh supplies for every classroom, a breakfast program for students who arrived hungry. She watched her colleagues' faces light up as resources they'd only dreamed of became reality. The irony wasn't lost on her that Robert's criticism had inadvertently launched her into a platform where her voice could reach thousands of teachers and millions of children worldwide. The book tour took her to cities across America, where she met teachers who shared similar stories of dedication and sacrifice. In Portland, she hugged a kindergarten teacher who had spent her own money on winter coats for students. In Atlanta, she listened to a high school teacher describe how he'd started a food pantry in his classroom. Each conversation reinforced what she'd always known, that education was about more than test scores and graduation rates. It was about human connection, about seeing potential in every child, about believing in futures that others couldn't imagine. The bestseller list was nice, but the real reward came in the emails from parents, thanking her for advocating for their children, from former students who credited her with changing their lives, from current teachers who felt validated and inspired by her words. Robert's attempts at reconciliation began when her name appeared in national magazines, intensifying when her TED Talk went viral, reaching a crescendo when the book hit #1. His voicemails shifted from demanding to pleading, his texts from angry to apologetic. But Marla had learned something powerful about her own worth. It wasn't determined by his approval or disapproval. She had raised thousands of children without bearing any of her own, had been more mother and mentor than he had ever been husband or partner. The small apartment she rented near the school felt more like home than the house they'd shared for 15 years. Her plants thrived in the morning sunlight, her books filled shelves without judgment, and the silence was peaceful rather than oppressive. She was learning to value herself the way she'd always valued her students, as someone with infinite potential and inherent worth. The reunion with her former students had become an annual tradition, but this year felt different. The community center buzzed with conversations between adults who had once been her third graders, now teachers, doctors, artists, and parents themselves. Marla moved through the crowd like a proud grandmother, collecting hugs and stories of achievement. But it was Tommy who stole her breath away. The boy with autism who had struggled to speak now stood before her as a young man, articulate and confident, holding a baby in his arms. "This is Lily," he said, his voice strong and clear. "She's named after you. You saved my life when no one else saw me. You taught me that being different wasn't being broken. Thank you for never giving up on me." The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Marla's thumb, and she felt the completion of a circle that had taken decades to draw. The medal ceremony at the White House felt surreal, but Marla's hands remained steady as she shook the president's hand and accepted the National Teacher of the Year award. The applause echoed through the East Room, but her mind was on her current students back in Chicago, on the lesson plans waiting on her desk, on the young minds that would greet her tomorrow morning with questions and wonder. The president spoke. Chair of Education as the foundation of democracy, of teachers as the architects of the future. But Marla knew the truth was simpler and more profound. Teaching wasn't about changing the world. It was about changing one child at a time, one moment at a time, one breakthrough at a time. She thought about Robert's words about being called useless and smiled. The world had decided otherwise, but more importantly, she had decided otherwise. Years later, Marla sat on the bench outside her school, watching a new generation of students pour through the doors she'd walked through for 2 decades. Her hair was silver now, her cardigan still worn, but chosen for comfort rather than necessity. The boy, now a man, approaching with a baby in his arms, was one of hundreds who had passed through her classroom, but his story was unique in its beauty. "This is Lily," he said, his voice carrying the same wonder it had held when he'd read his first book. "She's named after you. You saved my life when no one else saw me." Marla took the baby into her arms, feeling the weight of the future and the lightness of love. She wasn't just a teacher, she was legacy. She was hope, she was the proof that one person's dedication could echo through generations. The useless teacher had become useful to the world, not through seeking validation, but through the simple act of believing in the potential of every child who walked through her door. Never let someone who lacks heart define your worth. What you give, in kindness, in care, in love, is never useless. It's the foundation of everything good in this world. Congratulations, type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See you?